In today's episode, we continue with the foxtail theme, and that spins off into some interesting related topics. Last summer, I interviewed a veterinarian regarding the plight of the tule elk in Point Reyes National Seashore. And this actually led to a brief discussion on the foxtail situation in California.
A lot of the problems included these tule elk eating toxic plants that they shouldn't be eating, that they normally wouldn't be eating.
Right.
And I've hiked through that elk reserve a lot, and there's so much of the European agricultural plants, the annual grasses that stab you, and the thistles. I just wonder, from your perspective, how much that affects wildlife in ways that most of us don't even think about. I think about foxtails a lot because
Right.
they're a pretty serious threat to animals that we've decided to care about, our pets, our dogs.
Right.
And you encounter that how often? How frequently?
This time of year, every day. Every day. And veterinarians that do general practice are seeing, 3, 4 a day. It's a huge problem in skin, ears, eyes, noses. I pull them out of lungs sometimes. They're everywhere.
And it's very interesting how these seeds continue to burrow almost as though they're alive. They continue to make progress in toward the body once they find an opening.
Right. So they have little barbs on them so they can only go one direction. The little barbs stick out so any movement of the animal makes them go in, but they can't back out. So they will continue forward progress with every movement of the animal.
And without your surgical intervention, in some cases, this would lead to mortality.
Absolutely.
How did this not also happen to wildlife?
I'm sure it happens to wildlife. I'm sure it happens regularly to wildlife. Many of the things, they'll get an abscess, it'll drain. It might be a prolonged problem. It might eventually take care of itself. They might just live with a chronic infection somewhere, but I can't imagine that it doesn't also kill them.
Yeah, that's a pretty convenient thought to just dismiss it like that, which is what I've read when I was trying to research this. It was stated that wildlife know how to avoid the problem. Like, I don't know where they go. I don't know where they go that they can avoid it.
No. And we see at the Oakland Zoo, they have trouble with their animals when some of those foxtails get in their enclosures. Those are wild animals and they can't avoid it, even when it's just in a small area of their enclosure.
Just one of the many things that wouldn't even occur to most people. Yeah, we can give wildlife a lot of credit, and they deserve a lot of credit, at least compared to our own fragility. But the list gets really long. All these list of obstacles that they have to overcome.
Right.
At some point, you finally have to say, wow, okay, that's probably too much to live through.
Well, and when we make it so that they don't have enough forage and they have to turn to these plants that they otherwise wouldn't eat, we take away their ability to use their instincts because they're starving. Or drinking out of water that's looks like some of those ponds. Their instinct would tell them not to do that, but when they are so thirsty and have no other choices, of course they're going to drink out of that.
And the more I think about the state of the park, the more I wonder if we shouldn't be looking at the complete failure to restore native plant species and the complete failure to fight invasive plant species before we even get around to looking at the complete failure to protect the animal species, the fauna. Fauna depend upon flora. One is a base for the other. And these clips are in the Tule Elk Reserve. There's an opportunity for passive recovery of native plant species, but it would be nice to see the Park Service actually lend a hand in reintroducing native plant species and eradicating invasive plant species, neither of which, to my knowledge, have taken place. What I'm going to say next we'll probably get some laughs from people who refuse to sympathize or empathize with wildlife. But I hike a lot in the summertime because I'm trying to bring water out to animals that need water during the desperate dry stages and the heat waves. So I'm subjecting myself to the worst time of year of foxtails, and they are stabbing the hell out of me even when I'm wearing protective clothing. Sometimes I come across areas where it looks like a deer or an elk or other animal has bedded down for the night. And it is a bed of bristly foxtails and invasive thistle plants. Screw that. You know, how tough does a hide have to be for that not to be unpleasant? Because I've also come across beds of native plants where animals have bedded down for the night. A much, much more pleasant experience. These animals had a relationship with much friendlier plants, or at least what I would consider friendlier plants, because I could actually lay down on most native California plants and be comfortable. I wouldn't do that because I don't want to hurt them, because the number of native plants we have left is quite small. But I certainly don't have any desire to lay down on invasive plants. Are wildlife tougher than I am? Of course they are. But to jump to the other extreme of that argument and assume that it doesn't affect the animals is convenient cognitive dissonance. And the thing is, this is just part of an extremely long list. Let's say that you decide to dismiss the threat that this particular species of plant poses toward the wildlife. You also have to take into consideration the lack of their native forage, the lack of nutrition that they require, the lack of water, and even on the off chance that it's a rainy period, you have to consider the lack of healthy water because of the extended period of time that the water sources have been contaminated. You have to consider the lack of shelter, the lack of ability to hide from the sun, shade, temperature control. So you add up poisonous plants, you add in invasive flesh-penetrating plants and fighting the infections of abscesses. You add in the lack of nutrition from the plants that you evolved to consume, which simply aren't there to consume anymore. Why aren't they there to consume anymore? Because they have been replaced by plants and animals that are here for an industry. Not because of ecology, not because they're native to the area, but because they are part of an industry. And we're so far gone now that the native plants are being referred to as the invasive plants. And the Department of Agriculture, who should know better, are actually supporting this viewpoint. The National Park Service, who should know better, are actually supporting this viewpoint. We got to get rid of the invasive native plants that are causing all these problems and make more room for the industry. I digress. Sorry, what was I doing? I was counting down the issues that the wildlife are confronted with, and I think I was about to get to the lack of access to fresh water, the exposure to extreme climate changes that are taking place now. The list gets really long. And add on top of all of that, a depleted genetic pool. Are we going to dismiss every single challenge that wildlife face and just continue to say that they're fine? Or at some point, are we going to acknowledge that we have left them facing pure hell?